Great, another top whatever Senate list. I'm really gonna be stuck doing this until I reach 100 senators. If only there was another government position I could do a list on instead to bide my time so that I don't have to do this one immediately. Wait, I got it. I know this is a government position that not a lot of people look at that closely unless you're in one of the big cities, but mayors are arguably very important. While they may not handle certain things that might be interesting in regards to politics, things like foreign policy or whatever, they are the highest ranking government position that actually pays attention to the needs on the immediate ground. The biggest thing is that they're the ones who control basically all of the money within your city, which pays for a lot of services that either you take for granted or that they aren't paying attention to. And the reason they aren't paying attention to it is because you don't pay attention to them. Legitimately, go check to see when your next mayoral election is, because there's a good chance that you didn't know when it was going to happen, and that is exactly why those issues are not being addressed. Because mayors are arguably one of the most well-known officials that rely on voter apathy to remain in office. Maybe if we remind them how important they can be, maybe they'll actually start putting in the work. And as such, I'm going to be going over 10 individuals that I believe are the greatest mayors in United States history. Each of them getting there for doing a lot more than just fixing the potholes. The only stipulation in regards to this list is that I will include no mayoral incumbents. Alright, here we go. Number 10, John K. Fetterman. The 6'9" sheets lover himself, Fetterman has always struck a weird chord, appearing like some loner biker, but actually being more of a softie who cares. When he was elected as mayor of Braddock, Pennsylvania, one of his major things that he pushed for was helping the less fortunate while also trying to make this small town more prominent. One of his biggest things to do was to buy a lot of the vacant buildings in the town, refurbish them, then lease them for very cheap or even free. That not only helped the people currently residing there, but also increased the amount of people who moved there, which led to a rise in workers and industries. He helped fund Braddock's renaissance by establishing great working relationships with nonprofits. Fetterman took his duty as mayor very seriously, leading a protest to prevent the closure of a hospital and even getting their zip code and date of the 10 deaths that happened during his mayoralty tattooed on his arms. He took every job in government very seriously and will continue to do so. Number 9, Coleman Young. Young was the first black mayor of Detroit and had a long-standing history of radical political thought. While admittedly his mayoralty was not really that radical, he was very much an interesting contrast to a lot of other mayors at the time, which made many people regard him as a bad mayor. You see, up to that point, Detroit was essentially run by their police department, particularly by a branch called the Stop the Robberies, Enjoy Safe Streets, or STRESS unit. Young campaigned on ending police rule and then pushed for policies that would end the racism that was a product of said police rule, such as affirmative action programs and rebuilding the lower economic areas in the city, which, of course, would lead to people think that he is going soft on crime, odd considering that Young was very well known for even working across the aisle to get things done, leading to the Republican governor of Michigan to call him, quote, a man of his word who was willing to work with anyone, regardless of party or politics, to help Detroit, the city he loved and fought for all his life. I might get flack for putting this guy on the list and not a certain other prominent black mayor in US history, but honestly, when doing research into both of them, Young just seemed like he did more actual things, while the other one was more representative of an idea. Meanwhile, I'd prefer to look more at the actual things that were accomplished during their tenure. I do not hate them by any means, and you'll see verifiable proof that I don't hate them, but I honestly just couldn't put them on the list proper. If you'd like to make the case as to why I'm wrong, by all means, the comment section's right there. Number 8, Bud Clark. Bud's story is an interesting one, yet somehow I missed him in draft 1 of the list. A bar owner whose biggest claim to fame is a poster where he flashes a sculpture, was convinced by his friends to run for mayor of Portland, Oregon as a joke. And despite the odds, he ended up winning without the need of a runoff. And when he ended up getting into this seat, he became the epitome of a rural left populist. Clark pushed hard for mass transit, particularly the Max Light Rail, implemented community policing as opposed to harsher policing laws like was a big thing during the 80s, but the thing that got him national attention was his 12-point plan to combat homelessness, which prioritized housing, drug treatment, job creation, and providing public services to the homeless. I literally only learned about him right after he died and Oregon broke Twitter. And after looking into the tenure of this man, I honestly can understand why. Number 7. Gail McLaughlin. Gail is probably the most prominent Green elected to public office, using her mayoralty to turn the small blue-collar city, best known for its Chevron refinery, into becoming the unlikely vanguard for anti-corporate left-wing activism, earning her a lot of ire from the right people. She pushed hard for worker co-ops, rallied for a soda tax against the lobbying of the American Beverage Association, raised Richmond's minimum wage to $12.30 an hour, and made a huge stink by attending an Occupy rally on Veterans Day instead of the usual traditional thing mayors do. However, her two biggest things that defined her mayoralty were 1. Her and Chevron's very bad relationship, and 2. Her plans to help Richmond during the mortgage crisis and stop housing foreclosures. You see, her plan was to have the city go directly to the banks and buy mortgages at fair market value, then let homeowners refinance for dirt cheap. If the banks refused, she would then use eminent domain to do so anyways. So basically just being a very aggressive progressive on this issue. And personally, I think that's a good thing. Number 6. Rocky Anderson. Rocky is a very interesting figure. It was pretty clear that he had ambitions beyond being the mayor of Salt Lake City, and used that ambition to push towards a better Salt Lake City. First, we should acknowledge his activism during his term. He openly called out the Bush administration in regards to Iraq, and flat out just called for his impeachment. In regards to policies, during his tenure, Anderson had 3 major accomplishments. 1. Pushing for an affirmative action program that led to a 30% rise in minority employment. 2. Pushing for an end on the war on drugs and pulled out of the city's DARE program because of its ineffectiveness. And 3, his most important one, he led the Salt Lake City Green program, making sure that all of the city's buildings use energy-efficient light bulbs and that the city fleet would be replaced with alternative fuel cars. The program became so effective that he surpassed his city's Kyoto protocols 6 years ahead of schedule. With a record like that, I guess you can see why Rocky decided that he wanted to run for president next. But maybe Salt Lake City is where he belongs. Wink, wink. Number 5. Dennis Kucinich, the boy mayor of Cleveland himself. While Kucinich had major ambitions for his mayoral tenure, it ended up mostly becoming well known for his conflict regarding Cleveland's publicly owned electricity company, Municipal Light. You see, the previous mayor had agreed to sell Muni to their private sector competitor, the Cleveland Electrical Illuminating Company. However, Kucinich refused to do it. The CEI then began to price gouge all the electricity they sold to Muni so that Muni would not return a profit, making it more likely that he would sell it. However, Kucinich turned and then launched an antitrust lawsuit against the CEI. CEI, in turn, went to the banks that told Kucinich that if he did not sell Muni, they would not renew the city's credit on their loans, which would then cause the city to default. But Kucinich refused to budge, but unfortunately, in order to make sure that the city didn't default, he then had to raise taxes, which made many people in the city not like Kucinich for raising their taxes, costing him re-election. Many people thinking that it was probably not the best idea for Kucinich to do that. However, he has since been vindicated, as his refusal to sell muni saved Cleveland citizens $195,148,520 that they would have been paying had the municipal light company become a private company. And this is the thing that put him in the spotlight to then launch a long-standing career within left-wing politics, for better and for worse. Number 4, Samuel M. Jones. The mayor of Toledo, Jones was an avid Christian socialist who adhered to the golden rule, treat others the way you want to be treated, to the point where that ended up becoming his nickname. He used his platform to push for massive reforms, an 8-hour workday for city workers, opened free kindergartens, took batons away from police, and even, surprisingly, refused to enforce blue laws that restrict activities on Sunday for religious reasons. These policies made Jones beloved by the people, but hated by the business and political leaders, to the point where Jones had to run for re-election under the ballot line principle before party because the GOP refused to nominate him, and for some reason the Socialist Party refused to back him as well. However, he would end up passing away not that long afterwards, so his tenure, while notable, was albeit pretty short. But had he served longer, he probably would have done a lot more. Number 3, Bernie Sanders. Yeah, you all knew this was coming. Maybe the biggest shock is how low it is on the list, which is for both actual reasons and also because that would be a huge letdown, to be honest. I've talked about him a lot, his presidential runs, his House runs, his Senate runs, but now we can finally talk a little bit about where it all began. Bernie ran as an outsider that wanted to change the politics of Vermont, and by golly, he sure did. He was very outspoken in his agenda, even when he technically should not have been. An example was that Bernie was very involved with foreign policy causes like Nicaragua, even when people would respond to him with, "Burlington doesn't need a foreign policy." Domestic was more along the lines of public interest, openly talking against Reagan's cuts and trying to make up for it in the Burlington budget. But honestly, I've talked about Bernie enough. So let's move on to people who I haven't talked about a lot. Number 2, Emile Cedille. Cedille is here not only to represent himself, but all 3 of Milwaukee's sewer socialist mayors, as he was not only one of those, but he was also the first socialist mayor of a major American city, and he used his tenure to show that socialism can be accomplished on the local level, creating the first public works department in the United States, creating the first fire and police commission, as well as creating a city park system. He also attempted to clean up the city from its not-so-savory elements, enacting strict regulations on bars, as well as closing casinos and brothels. Hey, he can't be perfect, am I right? Cedille ended up becoming so wildly popular that the Democrats and the Republicans had to unite forces to try and stop him. And even though it succeeded in the short term, the long term of Cedille's tenure would remain strong. Before I unveil number 1, here are a couple of honorable mentions. If you have any more that you think should have been on the list instead, leave a comment below. Number 1, Fiorello LaGuardia. LaGuardia is well known as one of the greatest mayors in the history of the United States, and dang it, I can really see why. He came into office with 5 major goals. 1, restore the financial health and break free from bankers' control, expand the federally funded work relief program for the unemployed, end corruption in government and racketeering in key sectors of the economy, replace patronage with a merit-based civil service with high prestige, and modernize the infrastructure, especially transportation and parks. He left office accomplishing every single thing on the list. He did so by working closely with FDR and building a massive coalition of reform-minded Democrats, socialists, American laborites, and ethnic minorities to try and help the poor in his city get the help that they needed during the Depression. He also led something called the LaGuardia Committee, which was a scientific study in the effects of smoking weed, which debunked the Federal Bureau of Narcotics narrative so much that they forced LaGuardia's information into the garbage. Another thing he took a risk in was being an avowed anti-Nazi. Now you might be saying, risk? Yes, because back in the day, it used to be very controversial to be against the Nazis, but Fiorella didn't care. He publicly held anti-Nazi rallies, pushing for New York City to boycott German goods, and even offered police protection to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby over the backlash regarding the infamous Captain America #1 cover. He was also one of the inspiring figures to many other politicians in the era, many of which holding similar, if not more, radical beliefs than he did, the most prominent example being Congressman Vito Marcantonio. It does seem like choosing him is a very obvious answer, but I can see why it's an obvious answer. So yeah, those are the top 10 best mayors in US history. If you want to fight over people that I should have or should have not put on the list, by all means, go to the comments, you're free to do so. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when a future video of mine comes out. And if you need some more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.